She stopped before him, feeling the cold wind cut through her expensive coat. Time seemed to hesitate. The old man's gaze on the sidewalk held a disconcerting familiarity, like the shadow of someone she was trying to forget. Her father. The same gesture of clenching his own fist, as if trying to hold himself together, and in that instant something inside her silently crumbled. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. There was an apparent calm in Eleanor Vance's routine. Days ran like perfectly aligned lines, repeating the same rhythm of appointments, controlled smiles, and automatic gestures. At 45, she personified the perfection everyone expected. Her hair was always immaculate, her clothes exuded effortless elegance, and her house looked like it was pulled from a magazine. She was married to Richard, a man of means, known for his power and the precise way he organized the world around him. Nothing escaped the comfortable predictability of her mornings. Coffee served at 7:30. The chauffeur who arrived promptly at 8. The charity luncheons that occupied her afternoons without ever truly demanding more than her silent presence and generous checks. Dinner with her husband, always on time, always identical in its dynamic of superficial conversations. But there was an emptiness, a space between words that Eleanor couldn't name, a feeling that life was happening somewhere distant, while she merely observed through a thick, transparent display window. On that winter morning, the chauffeur had an unforeseen issue. Something simple that never happened. A flat tire on the way to pick her up. Eleanor decided to walk, a small deviation from her routine that seemed insignificant. Her Italian leather boots touched the pavement firmly as she walked through streets she only knew from the car window. It was when she turned the corner onto Maple Street that she saw him for the first time. An elderly man, probably in his 70s, sitting on the ground, wrapped in a worn blanket. Beside him a small, tattered backpack and an empty styrofoam cup. There was something dignified in his posture, despite the situation. He wasn't holding out his hand. He wasn't asking. He was just being. The man's gaze pierced Eleanor like a silent arrow. It wasn't the helplessness that struck her. It was the familiarity, that way of lowering his face, the tired look, the slight gesture of clenching his own fist. For an instant, she thought she was seeing Charles, her own father, the father who had passed away years before after an argument that was never resolved, leaving only unfilled silences and a longing she never named. Eleanor felt her heart race. She paused for a second, confused by her own reaction. The old man looked up. His eyes were brown, deep, marked by lines of expression that told untold stories. It wasn't her father, obviously, but it could be, and that realization unnerved her. She continued on her way with hurried steps, pretending not to have noticed that gaze. But the thought lingered. The image remained, like a photograph stored in her memory. That night during dinner, Richard spoke of acquisitions and mergers. Words that floated in the dining room air without truly touching her. Eleanor ate automatically, responding with monosyllables when necessary. In her mind, the old man's face merged with the last image she had of her father. "Are you listening to me?" Richard's voice brought her back. "I'm sorry. I'm a bit tired today." "You haven't done anything all day," he replied, with that slight tone of condescension he used when he thought she was being frivolous. Eleanor nodded, without the energy to argue. Richard was right, in a way. What had she done, after all? Attended a charity tea where no one really talked about the beneficiaries, bought another pair of shoes she didn't need, scheduled her next session with the dermatologist, a life of adornment. That's what she had. The next morning, Eleanor dismissed the chauffeur again. She said she needed to walk, that her doctor had recommended it. Richard didn't question it. Anything related to maintaining appearances was acceptable in his world. She followed the same path, feeling an inexplicable anxiety. Part of her hoped the man wouldn't be there anymore, that it had just been a fleeting coincidence. Another part, deeper and more silent, longed to see him again. The old man was in the same spot. This time he was slowly eating a piece of bread someone must have given him. Eleanor slowed her pace, observing him more closely. His thinning grey hair, the gnarled hands of someone who had worked hard, his slightly hunched posture. There was a silent dignity in him that contrasted with everything around. She stopped a few feet away. She opened her purse, took out her wallet. She pulled out a large bill, hesitated, and exchanged it for a smaller one. She approached with uncertain steps. "Good morning." Her voice sounded strangely formal. The man looked up, surprised by the direct approach. He nodded in silence. "It's cold today," Eleanor continued, realizing how artificial she sounded. "I thought maybe a coffee might help." She extended the bill, feeling awkward, unable to find the right words. The man looked at the money, then at her. There was something in his eyes. Not gratitude, not resentment. Just a deep understanding, as if he saw beyond the gesture, beyond the facade. "Thank you, Mom." The voice was low, but firm, a voice that had once been strong. Eleanor nodded, averted her gaze, and continued on her way. Her heart beat fast, as if she had done something forbidden. In a way, she had. In her polished and controlled world, that direct contact with raw reality was a transgression. In the days that followed, chance seemed to conspire to bring her back to that same corner, always with a different excuse to dismiss the chauffeur, always with a new pretext for herself, first out of curiosity, then out of something that approached necessity. Eleanor began to create a silent routine. She would pass by the spot, leave something, a coffee, a sandwich, a bottle of water, and continue on, exchanging few or no words. The man accepted, always with that same look of understanding that unnerved her. At home, the invisible presence of that stranger began to occupy her thoughts. In the empty conversations during dinners, in social gatherings where everyone talked and no one said anything, Eleanor found herself thinking about him, imagining his story, his past, the paths that had led him there. One afternoon, passing the corner, she didn't find him. She felt a pang in her chest, a concern that made no sense. After all, he was just a stranger, someone she barely knew. But the feeling persisted, a discomfort that stayed with her for the rest of the day. The next day, he was there again. Eleanor felt a disproportionate relief. "I thought something had happened." The words escaped before she could contain them. The man looked at her, surprised by the display of concern. "I went to the doctor," he replied simply. "The community clinic is far." It was the first personal information he had shared. Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. They remained silent for a few seconds. "My name is Eleanor," she said finally. "August," he replied after a brief hesitation. A name, a small fragment of identity. It was little, but it was more than they had until then. The following weeks brought a strange familiarity to that improbable relationship. Eleanor always passed by at the same time. August waited, with that gaze that seemed to see through her. They exchanged few words, but there was a silent communication that grew with each encounter. Over time, small details of August's life began to emerge. Fragments of his story shared in short sentences, between long silences. He had been a bricklayer. He had children he hadn't seen in years, an old disagreement he couldn't resolve. His wife had died young. The house was lost in a flood. The streets came later, when his body could no longer handle heavy labor and loneliness became too much to bear. Eleanor listened, absorbing every word like a sponge. She saw echoes of her own life in that story, not in material poverty, but in unresolved disagreements, in the silence that grows between people until it becomes insurmountable. At home, something began to change. Eleanor found herself observing her own life with different eyes. The emptiness of conversations with Richard, the artificiality of friendships cultivated for social convenience, the absence of purpose in her identical days. Her husband, always attentive to any alteration in his wife's behavior, didn't take long to notice. "You seem distracted," he commented one evening as she pushed her food around without really eating. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" The question caught her off guard. How long had it been since Richard had shown real interest in her thoughts? She felt like telling him about August, about their conversations, about how those encounters were stirring something within her, but she knew what his reaction would be. "Nothing important," she replied, lowering her eyes to her plate. Richard studied her for a few moments, then went back to talking about work. The moment had passed, but the discomfort remained. Eleanor began to realize she was living a divided life. On one side, the perfect wife, the impeccable hostess, the woman everyone admired for her elegance and discretion. On the other, someone who was beginning to question the value of it all, who found more meaning in a few minutes in the company of an elderly homeless man than in the luxurious parties she attended. August's presence, even without words, began to occupy the space that was once the silence between her and her husband. It was as if, for the first time in years, Eleanor was truly seeing the world around her, truly feeling something beyond the polished emptiness her life had become. One day, arriving at the corner, she found August more dejected than usual. His face was marked by a paleness that wasn't there the day before. His eyes deeper set, his body trembling slightly despite the weak morning sun. "Are you okay?" she asked, squatting down to be at his level. August tried to smile, but the gesture turned into a grimace of pain. "It'll pass," he murmured, but Eleanor saw the effort he was making to stay upright. She touched his forehead. It was hot, feverish. "You need a doctor." "I already went yesterday. They gave me medicine, but—" He didn't complete the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor understood. The medicine probably cost more than he could scrape together in days. "Where's the prescription?" August hesitated, then pointed to the worn backpack beside him. Eleanor took the carefully folded paper. An antibiotic, a painkiller. Nothing extraordinary, nothing she couldn't buy in seconds. "I'll get this for you." Before he could protest, she was already walking away towards the nearest pharmacy. She returned minutes later with the medications and a bottle of water. "Take the first one now." August obeyed, with that silent dignity that always accompanied him. His fingers brushed hers as he took the pills. His hands were rough, marked by work and time. "Thank you." The simple word carried a weight that went beyond the immediate gesture. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. There was something in that situation that deeply moved her, that went beyond compassion. It was as if in some way she was doing for August what she hadn't been able to do for her father, as if every small act of care was a belated way of asking for forgiveness. In the days that followed, she monitored August's progress. The medicine seemed to be working, but the process was slow. Winter was approaching, bringing colder, wetter nights. Eleanor began to worry about what would happen when the weather worsened. One afternoon she brought a new, thicker blanket. "For the cold nights," she explained, sitting beside him on the small step that had become his usual spot. August accepted the gift with a nod. Then, looking at the sky that was beginning to darken, he said something that surprised her. "Does your husband know you come here?" The direct question caught her off guard. Eleanor hesitated. "No." August nodded, as if he already knew the answer. "You should tell him." "He wouldn't understand." "Perhaps you're underestimating him." Eleanor smiled, a bitter smile. "You don't know Richard." They remained silent for a few minutes. The sound of distant traffic filled the space between them. "Do you know what made me lose my children?" August asked suddenly. Eleanor looked at him, surprised by the change of subject. "Pride," he continued, without waiting for an answer. "I thought I knew best, that my way of seeing the world was the only right one. When they tried to follow other paths, I judged them, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was already too late." The unexpected confession touched something deep in Eleanor. It was like hearing her father speak, as if August were a mirror reflecting what might have been. "I had a falling out with my father." The words came out before she could contain them. "He didn't approve of my marriage. He said Richard only cared about money and status, that I was trading my freedom for a gilded cage." August looked at her, with that silent understanding that seemed to read her thoughts. And he was right. The simple question hit Eleanor like a punch. "Yes," she admitted for the first time aloud, "but I was too much in love, too determined to prove him wrong. We went years without speaking. When I finally decided to look for him, he had passed away. A heart attack. I never had the chance to tell him he was right." A solitary tear ran down her face. Eleanor hadn't cried in so long that the sensation felt strange, almost too physical. "Perhaps he knew," August said softly. "How?" "Fathers always know." The simplicity of the answer carried a truth Eleanor desperately wanted to believe. When she arrived home that day, Richard was waiting for her. His face wore that closed expression she knew well, the same one he displayed when a deal didn't go as planned, when something escaped his control. "Where have you been?" he asked. Without preamble. "Walking." "Walking," he repeated with skepticism. "For 3 hours?" Eleanor felt her heart race. She hadn't expected to be confronted so directly. "I stopped for coffee. I needed to think." "Think about what?" The same question from days ago. But now there was something different in his tone, a veiled accusation, a suspicion. "Us," she replied, surprising herself with her honesty. Richard raised his eyebrows. "And what is there to think about us?" Eleanor hesitated. How to explain the emptiness growing between them? How to talk about the suffocating feeling that had accompanied her for years, but which she could only now name? "I feel like we're living separate lives, that we don't even know each other anymore." Richard studied her for a few moments, then his face softened into a condescending smile. "You're being emotional. Perhaps it's time to reschedule that appointment with Dr. Miller." Dr. Miller was the psychiatrist Richard had insisted she see years ago, when she expressed dissatisfaction with the direction of their lives. The pills he prescribed had eased the discomfort, transforming it into an acceptable numbness. "I don't need medicine, Richard. I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening," he said, but his tone indicated that he had already closed the subject in his mind. Eleanor felt the familiar sense of powerlessness. As always, Richard turned any questioning into her problem, into an emotional fragility that needed to be medicated, not heard. She went up to the bedroom without saying anything more. She was too tired to insist. When winter arrived in full force, Eleanor found August trembling, with a gaze more empty than usual. His fragile body betrayed the fever that had returned. Stronger this time. His dry cough echoed on the deserted sidewalk. For the first time, she felt real fear. The kind of fear we only experience when someone we love is in danger. "You need a hospital." August shook his head negatively. "I already went to the clinic. They said I needed tests, but you have to schedule. Wait." Eleanor knew what that meant. The wait could be too long. "You're going to a hospital now." Her voice had a firmness she didn't even recognize in herself. A real hospital. Before August could protest, Eleanor already had her cell phone in hand, calling a taxi. Not the family chauffeur. She knew that would get back to Richard. a regular, anonymous taxi. When the vehicle stopped, Eleanor helped August to his feet. He was surprisingly light, as if the years on the street had consumed his substance. He leaned on her reluctantly, still trying to maintain the dignity that characterized him. "You don't have to do this," he murmured as she helped him into the taxi. "Yes, I do," Eleanor replied, and there was a certainty in her voice that allowed no argument. At the private hospital, the receptionist's gaze shifted between Eleanor in her expensive coat and August in his worn clothes and street smell. The incongruity of the scene was obvious, but the platinum credit card she presented silenced any questioning. "This is my uncle," she lied with a naturalness that surprised her. "He needs urgent care." The following hours were a blur of tests, consultations, and diagnoses. Pneumonia, exacerbated by years of exposure to the elements and already fragile health. Nothing that couldn't be treated with the right resources, nothing that Eleanor's money couldn't solve. When she finally left the hospital, August was settled in a private room, receiving intravenous antibiotics and being constantly monitored. The doctor assured her that with proper treatment, he would recover. Eleanor looked at the clock. It was past midnight. Richard would certainly be furious about her unexplained absence. She picked up her cell phone, saw the missed calls, the texts demanding explanations. She felt a deep weariness, a type of exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She called another taxi and gave her home address. During the ride, she tried to organize the explanations she would give. But every scenario she imagined ended the same way, with Richard turning her concern for August into something insignificant, into an emotional eccentricity. The house was silent when she arrived. For a moment, Eleanor had the absurd hope that Richard was already asleep. But as soon as she entered the living room, she saw him sitting in his favorite armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face a mask of contained irritation. "Where have you been?" The same question from days ago, but now with a calculated coldness that was more frightening than any shout. Eleanor took a deep breath. The moment she had feared had arrived. But strangely, she no longer felt afraid, just a calm resignation, a certainty that there was no turning back. At the hospital, Richard stood up, concern momentarily replacing anger. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Eleanor hesitated. "I was there with a friend." "A friend?" Richard repeated, suspicion returning to his face. "What friend?" "His name is August." August. The name sounded strange in Richard's mouth, as if he tried to associate it with some common acquaintance and failed. "And who is this August I've never heard of?" Eleanor knew there was no way to soften what was to come, no way to make what she had done acceptable in Richard's eyes. "He's an elderly man who lives on the street, near Maple Street." Richard's face slowly transformed as the words registered. First came confusion, then incredulity, and finally something akin to contempt. "Are you telling me you spent the night in a hospital with a homeless person?" The word homeless person, spoken with such revulsion, made Eleanor shrink internally, but she maintained her composure. "He's sick. Pneumonia. He needed help." Richard laughed, a humorless sound. "And since when is that your problem?" He walked up to her, his eyes fixed on her face. "What is happening to you, Eleanor? First the absences, then the talks about us, and now this." "He reminds me of my father." The confession came out as a whisper. Richard stopped, surprised by the mention of his father-in-law, who was rarely remembered. "Your father has been dead for years." "I know, and I never had a chance to make peace with him. And you think helping some stranger is going to change that?" His tone was scornful. "That it's going to erase the past?" "It's not about that." Eleanor tried to explain, but the words seemed inadequate to express what she felt. Richard studied her for a moment, Then his face softened into an expression she knew well, that of the patient husband dealing with his wife's emotional whims. "Eleanor, I understand that you still carry guilt about your father, but this isn't the way to deal with it. You've put your health at risk, exposed yourself to who knows what kind of illnesses, spent money on someone you don't even really know." He approached, touched her face with calculated gentleness. "Let's forget about this, okay? Tomorrow I'll call Dr. Miller, we'll schedule an appointment. You'll feel better." Eleanor recoiled, pulling away from his touch. "There's nothing wrong with me, Richard. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly." The rehearsed gentleness vanished from his face. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not abandoning August. He needs help and I can offer it." Richard stared at her coldly. "Want to know what I think? I think you found a cause to fill the emptiness of your privileged life, that you're bored with your comfort and decided to play charity with the first unfortunate soul who crossed your path." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. Because, in part, he might be right. Perhaps there was indeed an element of selfishness in her initial compassion. Perhaps she had started helping August to fill her own emptiness, but something had changed. What began as curiosity, as a distant echo of remorse for her father, had transformed into something deeper, into a real connection, into genuine care. "Think what you want," she replied, too tired to argue, "but I'm not leaving him alone." Richard studied her for a long moment, then, with a calculated calm that was more frightening than any outburst, he said, "You have a choice to make, Eleanor. This obsession with that homeless man, or our life together. I won't allow you to turn our reputation into a joke because of an emotional whim." The word choice hung in the air between them, heavy as lead. Eleanor felt something break inside her. Not from pain, but from clarity, as if a veil had been removed, revealing the true nature of what her life had become. "It's not a whim, Richard. It's humanity." She went up to the bedroom without waiting for a response. The conversation was over, but Eleanor knew nothing was resolved. The choice Richard had mentioned hung in the air like a silent threat. In the days that followed, a fragile truce settled. Richard, pragmatic as always, avoided the subject, treating the situation as a temporary problem that would soon resolve itself. Eleanor, for her part, divided her days between unavoidable social commitments and discreet visits to the hospital. August was slowly improving. His tired body responded to the antibiotics, regular nutrition, and the comfort of a clean bed. But there was an restlessness in him, a sense of displacement that Eleanor understood well. "How much longer are they going to keep me here?" he asked one afternoon as she adjusted the pillows behind his back. "Until you're fully recovered." August shook his head. "That's very kind of you, but I can't accept it." "Why not?" "Because I know what's happening." He looked at her directly. "I overheard the nurses talking. Your husband doesn't approve. You're fighting because of me." Eleanor felt her face flush. She hadn't imagined the rumors would reach him. "Don't worry about it." "How can I not? You have your life, Eleanor, a good, comfortable life. You can't throw that away for an old man you barely know." There was an enormous dignity in those words, a genuine concern that deeply moved her. "I'm not throwing anything away," she replied softly. "I'm finding something I lost a long time ago." "What?" "My humanity." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. August studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. When Eleanor returned home that night, she found Richard waiting for her in the living room. There was something different in his posture, a resolution she hadn't seen before. "We need to talk." Eleanor felt her heart race. She knew that tone, the same one he used when he needed to fire someone, when he needed to end a partnership that no longer served him. About what? about what we're going to do moving forward. Richard gestured to the couch. Please, sit down. She obeyed, keeping a safe distance. He remained standing, as if needing the advantage of height for what was to come. I looked into this protégé of yours. He began with calculated coldness. August Miller, former bricklayer, went through social programs, shelters, alcoholism treatment. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. Of course, Richard would use his contacts to investigate August. That's how he operated. Information was power. What do you mean by that? I mean, he's not who you think he is. He's not some kind of street sage with whom you can atone for your guilt over your father. He's just an old alcoholic who lost everything because of his addiction. The rawness of the words hit her like a slap. Not because of what they revealed about August. She already knew about his drinking problems. He himself had mentioned them. But because of the lack of compassion, the reduction of an entire life to a single aspect. And does that make him less human, less deserving of help? Richard smiled, a humorless smile, always so idealistic. His tone was like one speaking to a child. But real life doesn't work that way, Eleanor. People like him have had their chances. They made their choices. Like I'm making mine now? She asked, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Richard studied her, his irritation momentarily replaced by surprise. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to stop helping August just because you've decided he doesn't deserve it. A heavy silence settled between them. Richard stared at her with an expression that mixed disbelief and contained anger. Do you know what people are saying? He asked finally. That my wife has gone crazy, that she's obsessed with a homeless man, that perhaps she's having an affair, because what else could explain so much interest? Eleanor felt her face burn. That's absurd. It's what it looks like from the outside. He approached, lowering his voice. Do you have any idea of the damage this could do to my reputation, to our name? The word our sounded strange to Eleanor's ears. How long had it been since they truly felt like a couple, a unit? Perhaps I don't care about that anymore, she replied, surprised by her own honesty. Richard looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. What happened to you? The question seemed genuinely perplexed. Eleanor pondered for a moment. How to explain the transformation occurring within her? How to put into words the slow awakening of something that had been dormant for so long? I remembered who I used to be, she replied simply, before I let fear and comfort mold me into something I no longer recognize. Richard recoiled, as if her words had physically struck him. Are you saying I molded you, that I transformed you into something you didn't want to be? No, Richard, I'm saying I allowed it, that I gave up who I was to fit into the life you designed for us. And now, looking back, I don't recognize the woman I became. The silence that followed was dense, laden with unspoken truths accumulated over years. Richard studied her with a mixture of anger and incomprehension. If that's how you feel, he said finally, perhaps it's best we take a break. The word break hung between them, laden with meaning. It wasn't a divorce, not yet. It was a door left ajar for Eleanor to reconsider, for her to get back in line. Perhaps, she agreed, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. Richard nodded, with that cold efficiency that characterized all his decisions. I'm going to the downtown apartment. When you come to your senses, I'll be there. Without waiting for a response, he went up to the bedroom. Eleanor remained in the living room, feeling the weight and lightness of the decision she had just made. She had chosen the harder, more uncertain path, but for the first time in years, she felt she was being true to herself. When August was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later, the question of where he would go became urgent. The streets were out of the question. His body was still recovering. Winter was unforgiving. Public shelters were crowded, offering little more than a cot in a communal hall. Eleanor made a decision she knew would be the point of no return in her marriage. She took August to the family's beach house, a property rarely used since Richard preferred to invest in international travel. It was a simple place by their standards, but infinitely better than any shelter. The housekeeper, Martha, received instructions to discreetly look after the family friend. A simple and kind woman, she asked no questions when she saw the elderly man arrive with his few possessions in a hospital bag. "He'll stay in the guest room," Eleanor explained. "He needs rest and good nutrition. The money for expenses has already been arranged." Martha nodded, with the serene dignity of someone who had seen too much of life to be surprised. "You can count on me, Ma'am. I'll take care of him as if he were my own father." August observed the scene with evident discomfort. When Martha withdrew to prepare the room, he turned to Eleanor. "I can't accept this." "Why not? It's too much. He searched for the right word. "It's charity." The word, spoken with such reluctance, made Eleanor understand something important. August, with all his apparent fragility, still maintained a pride that needed to be respected. He didn't want to be an object of pity, a redemption project. "It's not charity, August, it's friendship." "Friendship," he repeated the word as if testing its taste. "Between a wealthy woman and an old man from the streets? Between two people who are both lost in different ways?" Eleanor replied with an honesty that surprised them both. August studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "For how long?" "Until you decide what you want to do, until you're strong enough to choose your own path." The answer seemed to satisfy him. There was respect in it, recognition of his autonomy. When Eleanor returned home, she found it strangely empty. Richard had taken his things, as promised. The spaces he once occupied, his office, his side of the closet, his armchair in the living room, now seemed like silent gaps in the familiar landscape. She expected to feel fear, regret. But what came was an unexpected relief, a feeling of space to breathe that she hadn't experienced in years. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor divided her time between the house in the city and regular visits to August. She observed his physical recovery with satisfaction. His once sunken cheeks regained color, his fragile body recovered some strength. More importantly, there was a renewed spark in his eyes, an interest in the world that surpassed mere survival. Martha reported with evident affection how he helped in the garden, fixed small things around the house, sat on the porch to watch the sea, how he talked about his life, about his distant children, about his mistakes and regrets. "He's looking for his daughter," she recounted one afternoon while serving tea to Eleanor. "He said he hasn't seen her in years, that he doesn't even know if she still lives in the same town." The information touched something deep in Eleanor. August's search for his daughter echoed her own loss, the father who had passed without reconciliation. "Does he have her address?" "He has an old one from years ago. He doesn't even know if it's still current." Eleanor felt a determination grow within her. She could use her resources, her contacts, to help in this search. She could, perhaps, give August the chance for reconciliation that she herself never had. But first, she needed to be sure that's what he wanted. On her next visit, she found him on the porch, looking out at the sea. There was something contemplative in his posture, a serenity that wasn't there when she first met him. "Martha told me about your daughter," Eleanor said, without beating around the bush, sitting in the chair beside him. August looked at her, surprised by the direct approach. "I have 2 children, actually. A son and a daughter. I haven't seen either of them in over 15 years. Why?" He sighed deeply. "Pride, as I already said. They wanted to follow paths I didn't approve of. My daughter Louise wanted to marry a man I thought was no good. My son Anthony wanted to go to the big city, study art instead of taking over the small family business. Eleanor listened, absorbing every word. And you stopped them. I tried. I used every argument, every threat. I said I'd disinherit them, that I would never accept their choices. August smiled sadly, as if I had so much to leave behind. What happened? What always happens when we try to control others. They went their own ways anyway. Louise married the young man. Anthony went to New York City to study art, and I, fool that I was, carried out my threat. I cut ties. The story was painfully familiar. Eleanor thought of her own father, the harsh words exchanged at their last meeting, his refusal to attend her wedding. And then? Then life did what it always does. It taught its lessons the hard way. I lost my wife to cancer. I lost my house in a flood. I lost my job when my body could no longer handle heavy labor. And when I had nothing left, when I finally understood what truly mattered, it was too late. Did you try to find them? Once, years ago, I got Louise's address through a mutual acquaintance. I went there, but I didn't have the courage to knock on the door. I stood across the street, watching the house, imagining the life she had built without me. Eleanor felt her eyes well up. Why didn't you knock? Fear, August admitted with simplicity. Fear that she would reject me, as I had rejected her. Fear of seeing in her eyes the same scorn I had shown in mine. The silence that followed was laden with contained emotion, with shared regrets. I could help you find them again, Eleanor offered finally. I have resources, contacts. August looked at her for a long time. Why? Why would you do that for me? The question was direct, demanding an equally honest answer. Because you remind me of my father. Because perhaps by helping you achieve the reconciliation I never had with him, I might find some peace. There was an implicit admission in her answer that her motivation wasn't entirely altruistic, that there was something personal, perhaps selfish, in her compassion. August nodded, understanding. And your husband, what does he think of all this? Eleanor felt the weight of the question. In recent weeks, she had avoided talking about Richard during her visits. We've separated. The information hung between them, heavy with implications. Because of me? The concern in August's voice was genuine. No, August. Because of me, because I needed to choose between continuing to be who I had become or rediscovering who I truly am. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if accepting the answer. As for your children, Eleanor continued, returning to the original subject, the offer still stands. If you want to find them, I can help. August looked at the sea thoughtfully. I need to think about it. Of course, there's no rush. The process of locating August's children took time. Eleanor hired a discreet private investigator who worked with the limited information available, names, an approximate date, an old address. The search was complicated by the absence of digital records, simple people from a generation before the explosion of social media. Meanwhile, her own life was undergoing profound transformations. Richard, after the initial shock of the separation, had moved from coldness to anger and finally to a kind of resigned disbelief. Lawyers were already discussing the terms of a divorce that seemed inevitable. The social circle Eleanor had frequented for years showed its true nature. Friendships she believed to be solid proved fragile, based more on convenience and status than on real connection. Invitations to events dwindled. Phone calls became less frequent. It was as if her decision to help August, to question the values that sustained that world, had revealed an irreparable fissure. Strangely, the exclusion didn't affect her as it would have before. There was a liberation in stepping away from that universe of appearances, in no longer needing to calculate every word, every gesture, to fit other people's expectations. In compensation, other connections flourished. Martha, who had started as just the housekeeper, had become a friend and confidant. Conversations with August, increasingly profound, offered a perspective none of her old friends could provide. One day, the investigator called. He had found Louise, August's daughter. She lived in a small town a few hours away, was an elementary school teacher, married to the same man her father had disapproved of years before. They had 2 teenage children. Eleanor felt her heart race upon receiving the news. Now came the most delicate part: how to approach the subject, how to mediate a reunion laden with so many emotions. She decided to go personally speak with Louise before telling August. She needed to prepare the ground, understand if there was openness for reconciliation, protect him from a rejection that could destroy him in his still fragile state. Louise's house was simple, but welcoming. A well-tended garden, curtains in the windows, a bicycle leaning against the wall, evidence of a modest but stable life. Eleanor parked her car on the street out front, feeling an anxiety she hadn't experienced in years. What would she say? How would she explain her presence, her connection to a father who had been absent for so long? The woman who answered the door had August's same eyes, deep, expressive, marked by lines that spoke of a life intensely lived. Her hair already showed grey strands. Her face had the serene beauty of someone who doesn't fight against time. "Louise Miller?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "Yes," the woman replied, curious but not suspicious. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I would like to speak with you about your father, August." The impact of the name was immediate. Louise's eyes widened, a hand instinctively rising to her chest. "My father? Is he okay?" The genuine concern in the question gave Eleanor the first clue that perhaps, despite the years of separation, the bond wasn't completely broken. "He's recovering. He's been through some difficult times, but he's better now." "Recovering from what? Where is he?" The barrage of questions indicated interest, not rejection. Eleanor felt a cautious relief. "It's a long story. May we talk?" Louise hesitated only for a second before opening the door wider, inviting her in. The conversation that followed was intense, emotional. Eleanor recounted how she had met August, the circumstances of their encounters, his illness, his recovery. She omitted some of the harsher details, the years on the street, the alcoholism, not out of dishonesty, but out of compassion. There would be time for the full truth later. Louise listened, alternating between tears and questions, between anger at the abandonment and relief at knowing her father was alive, that he was well. "Why didn't he come personally?" she asked when Eleanor finished her account. "He doesn't know I'm here," she replied with honesty. "I wanted to be sure you would be open to seeing him before creating expectations for him." Louise nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. "Is he still so proud? Does he still think I need his forgiveness and not the other way around?" The question was legitimate, laden with the hurt of years of rejection. "No, Louise, he's changed. Life taught him the hard way." The explanation hung in the air with all its unspoken implications. "And my brother? Did you find Anthony too?" Eleanor shook her head negatively. "We're still looking. We have less information about him." Louise nodded thoughtfully. "He's in New York City, from what I heard. He has a studio, he makes sculptures. We keep in sporadic contact. But it's been a few years since we've seen each other." "So," she asked finally, coming to the crucial point of the visit, "would you be willing to see your father?" Louise looked out the window for a long moment, as if searching for the answer in the familiar landscape of the backyard where her children played. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "There's so much hurt, so much lost time. He knows that, and he's prepared for your anger, your resentment. He just wants a chance to say what he didn't have the courage to say before, that he regrets it, that you were right to follow your heart." Louise's eyes filled with tears again. "He said that I was right," Eleanor nodded. Those were practically his exact words. The silence that followed was laden with contained emotion, with shared regrets, with possibilities. Louise took a deep breath, like someone making a difficult decision. "Bring him here, on Sunday. We'll have a family lunch, like we should have done all these years." The simplicity of the answer, the openness to reconciliation, touched Eleanor deeply. She thought of her own father, the opportunity she never had to make peace, the chance that August and Louise would now have, thanks to a series of coincidences, of choices that had connected their lives. "Thank you," she said with sincerity. "That will mean the world to him." When she told August about the meeting with his daughter, about the invitation to lunch, she saw something happen on his face, a crumbling of defenses, a relaxing of muscles that had been tense for years. For the first time since she had known him, she saw him cry, not convulsive, dramatic weeping, but silent tears that spoke of relief, of gratitude, of a weight finally being lifted. "She would receive me after everything I did." "She has already received you, August, in her heart. The rest is just formalizing what has already begun." He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "And Anthony? You said he's in New York City?" "Yes, Louise has some contact with him. We'll find him too, I promise." August took her hand, a rare gesture of physical contact. "I don't know how to thank you, what you've done for me." "You don't need to thank me. In a way, you've done the same for me." "How?" "You helped me see beyond the life I had built. You helped me remember who I was, who I could be." Sunday lunch was an intense emotional experience. Eleanor accompanied August, serving as a bridge between past and present, between the repentant father and the family he had abandoned. The first moments were tense, laden with unspoken words, with repressed emotions. But there was also a genuine desire for reconnection, to build something new upon the ruins of what had been lost. Louise's husband, the man August had disapproved of so many years before, showed a generosity of spirit that surprised everyone. Without resentment, without demands, he extended his hand to his father-in-law, offering a new beginning. The grandchildren, curious teenagers, watched their unknown grandfather with a mixture of fascination and reserve. There wasn't the intimacy built over years, but there was the possibility of it, the potential for connection. When it was time to leave, August hugged his daughter for a long time. Words weren't necessary. The gesture contained everything that needed to be said in that moment. In the car, returning to the beach house, he remained silent for a long time. Then, looking at the road ahead, he simply said, "Thank you for giving me my life back." Eleanor smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "We still need to find Anthony." "Yes, but even if we don't find him, I've already received more than I deserved, more than I ever hoped for." The following months brought profound changes for both of them. With Eleanor's help, August gradually rebuilt his relationship with Louise and her family. Visits became regular, conversations easier, more natural. The grandchildren, overcoming their initial shyness, discovered in their grandfather a patient listener, a storyteller from another time. The investigator finally located Anthony in New York City. As Louise had said, he had become an artist, a sculptor with some recognition in the alternative circuit. He lived modestly but honorably in a small studio where he transformed wood and metal into forms that spoke of roots, of belonging, of lost and recovered connections. The reunion with his son was more complex, more laden with ambivalent emotions. Anthony carried deeper hurts, a resentment that didn't dissipate so easily. But even there was room for forgiveness, for a new beginning. As for Eleanor, the divorce was finalized without great drama. Richard, pragmatic as always, preferred a quick, discreet settlement to a public confrontation that would tarnish his carefully constructed image. She kept the beach house, a significant portion of the assets they had built together, with enough to live comfortably without depending on anyone. But money, which once seemed to be the center around which everything revolved, no longer held the same importance. There were other values, other riches that Eleanor had learned to recognize. August, his health recovered and family ties re-established, decided it was time to follow his own path. He moved closer to his daughter, to a small apartment that Eleanor helped him find and furnish. He accepted no more than that. His dignity, his healthy pride, wouldn't allow it. "I need to live by my own means now," he explained when she offered continuous financial help. "You've already done more than enough." Eleanor understood and respected his decision. The bond between them, forged in extraordinary circumstances, didn't depend on money or obligations. It was something deeper, more genuine, a true friendship based on mutual recognition, respect, and shared gratitude. She also moved forward, rediscovering parts of herself that had been forgotten over the years. She went back to studying, to getting involved with causes that truly mattered, to building friendships based on affinity, not status. She moved to a smaller, more welcoming apartment, got rid of possessions that no longer reflected who she was. Sometimes, sitting on the porch of the beach house, looking at the sea that August so admired, Eleanor thought of her father. She imagined what he would say if he could see her now, if he knew the path she had taken. She liked to believe he would smile, that he would be proud of the woman she had finally become. And perhaps, in some mysterious way she couldn't rationally explain, he knew. Perhaps the chance encounter that led her to that corner, that made her stop before a man who so resembled her father, wasn't really chance at all. There was no way to be certain. But there was comfort in that thought, in that possibility that, even after passing, her father had found a way to guide her back home, back to herself. In life, sometimes you have to get completely lost to finally find your way back. If this story touched your heart, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.